The first writers in residence came to the James Merrill House 25 years ago, shortly after James Merrill's death in 1995. Since then, over 80 writers have visited, staying in his home, a National Historic Landmark, to work on projects of their own. Thanks to Merrill's generosity, the house now belongs to the Stonington Village Improvement Association and is an ongoing inspiration for writers and poets from around the world. For more information, visit our website, jamesmerrillhouse.org. Thank you.
Hello, I am Joanna Scott, a member of the James Merrill House Committee, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to our latest virtual reading and introduce Paul Maddern, who is our current poet in residence at 107 Water Street. I'll be in conversation with Paul after his reading, so please feel free to post comments and questions for Paul. There's a sense I have from reading Paul's work that he has a spirit of a traveler. He moves easily, fluidly between settings, between subjects, between influences, between poetic forms, and yet wherever he lands, he expresses the warmth and confidence of someone who feels at home. Jane Ware offers an insightful description of Paul's collection, The Beachcomber's Report. She writes, "There is a powerful sense of the sensuous exotic, but it's not exotic for the sake of it. There's no artifice. Bold, brave, and passionate, witty and inventive, perfectly pitched and balanced." Paul's poems reach broadly through global art and literature and history, wide-ranging references drawn from all around the world or fit into startling congruencies. The lines are full of lists that become fascinating in themselves. And here's a list from Paul's poem entitled Unit 3. The mink, the dolphin, the whale, the otter, the seal, the gull, the cuckoo, the curlew, the lizard, the newt, the fox, the hare, the stoat, the linnet, the kestrel, the raven, the mouse, the lapwing, the shag, the shrew. It's easy to make a list. It is not easy to make a list that is sonically rewarding, coherent, and at every turn surprising. There's a welcome clarity and ease to the language. In the midst of their phenomenal verbal dexterity, the poems invite us to understand them. They're full of mysteries and yet are candid with their meanings. Once you start reading Paul's poems, you know to expect the unexpected appearances of unexpected words. So here's some hubbledy-bubbledy, cleromancy, ipsissima verba. He can work into otherwise casual language the most complex and unique sounds. In a section subtitled The Glade, in a poem from his most recent book, he describes a gleam of light, a bright space between the clouds, like frith and fur lap up the golden fish. I was so struck by these lines, and in particular the phrase frith and fur. It sounds so simple, so direct, and yet is so unusual. Actually Googled the phrase frith and fur, and the only reference that came up was Paul's poem. I asked Paul about it, and he has a story to tell about it, actually. There's also a lyricism infusing the poetry, a music that is audible throughout the poems, as in these lines. Clamor is constant, the wind so constant, there is no break. Ocean so constant, there is no telling the point at which the waves break. We can register from these lines that Paul has a special alertness to the power of the sea, and I'm wondering how our little seaside borough of Stonington will influence his new work. He was born in Bermuda and has lived in Northern Ireland since 2000. His books include Kelpdings, The Beachcomber's Report, Pilgrimage, and The Tipping Line. He's the owner and director of the Rivermill Writers Retreat in County Down, Northern Ireland. He is the editor of Queering the Green, post-2000 queer Irish poetry, published by Lifeboat Press in 2021, and he is the recipient of 2 Bermuda government literary awards. So I'm glad to welcome Paul.
And I'm glad to be here, Joanna. Thank you very much for that really lovely introduction. It's
Great to see you. Wow.
thank you.
That you make you give the impression of being at home when you were at home in that painting behind you there.
Well, yeah, I chose it because it's very striking. It's upstairs in the sort of sunroom, which leads to the deck outside. And it's this massive painting of a group who called themselves the Surly Temple, apparently. And they are Eleanor Perrine, Robert Morse, David Jackson, who is that chap there. That was James Merrill's long-term partner. Grace Stone, Isabel Morse, and James Merrill himself. There.
And now it includes Paul Maddern.
That includes, yes, yes, a bit, perhaps a little bit grandiloquent and pretentious, but there we go.
How are you liking life at 107 Water Street?
I don't want to go home. Stonington itself is just so physically beautiful. I mean, it's stunning. And I'm looking out at the very last of the sunset just out there. And it's another glorious sunset. They've just all been amazing. But it's not just that. It's the people, you know, they have made me feel incredibly welcome here. And I need to thank everyone on the board and committee and the director and Bergen, who's been, you know, her task is to sort of oversee the writers in residence here. And she's just been incredibly generous, as have many people, including Penny and yourself and Kate and others. So it's just been an absolute delight, really has. And I'm also not just the sort of social side of things, because that's, in a way, that's an added bonus. I've been very fortunate in the fact that I've actually been able to write stuff while I'm here as well.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
I hope we'll hear some of that tonight.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. And you've written about James Merrill, and I know you feel a special connection to him. So what is it like being in his rooms?
Well, I did. There's a chap called, I wanted to sort of say that I'm going to dedicate this reading to a guy called Bob Fish, who was from Chicago but lived in Tennessee. He was also gay. And he read a poem of mine online many years ago now. And in 2003, he sent me Merrill's collected. I didn't ask for him to do so, but he just thought there was something in my work that I might enjoy Merrill. And I had, to be honest with you, I hadn't read Merrill before that. So he very kindly, sent me the collected. And he was right. You know, I just clicked with it right away.
Wow.
And so many of the poems, you know, some of the very long poems, the days of ... But, you know, so many like Charles on Fire, the Kimono, all sorts of poems. It just suddenly, it really struck a nerve in me as a writer. I think I love the formal dexterity of it. I love the light touch, but also very serious touches as well. Obviously identified, you know, with him as a gay man. And it's important, I think, to have those models going, you know, as a writer. And from everything I read about him, I was impressed with him as a human being as well. And very often the two don't go together. You know, there are a lot of major poets who were perhaps not wonderful people. But in James Merrill's case, it seems to be that he was a good soul as well.
Yeah. We're both the beneficiaries of it, having both been writers in residence there. Yeah. But so being in the actual space in his office, looking at the light over the sunset over the harbor must be extremely powerful.
It is. I mean, what I think I might have mentioned it to you the other night. What's really struck me or struck a chord with me, as we all know, Merrill was an incredibly wealthy man, and this flat itself, this apartment, is modest in some ways. You know, it's not. Could have bought any of the properties here, some of which are very fun. But he chose this place, and he's chosen to fill it, along with David, I presume, with these wonderful little knickknacks, little sort of cheap little touristy things that he bought on trips everywhere, and they're scattered everywhere. And I love that. I mean, I love the weird orange painting. I love in the dining room area.
The color,
The color, and I love the wallpaper in the sort of more living room section, and the weird hidden door into the inner room where he wrote, and all of that is lovely, but and strange. But I really love those little trinkets that are just everywhere.
Oh yes, wonderful. And I'm sure you've seen it, the fascinating exhibition on the wallpaper down in the visitor center. So to all viewers, if you are in Stonington, stop in to our visitor center to see this wonderful exhibition about the bat wallpaper at 107 Water Street. Well, let me turn it over to you,
Okay.
Paul, and we really look forward to hearing you read. And to all our viewers, if you have questions or comments, you can send them to, I think just send them somehow. They appear in comments, so please feel free. Paul and I will have a conversation after the reading, and we can respond to some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. So I mentioned Bob earlier, and he died in August 2019. So this reading is dedicated to his memory, and I wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for Bob. I thought instead of doing a sort of chronological order of the poems, I might do poems that are of particular, sort of group them in terms of areas that they are concerned with. And there's some overlap as well. And I thought I would start with a poem that does just that. It takes its cue, it's in Beachcomber's report. It takes its cue from a conversation I had with a man called Owen Walls, who is a poet and novelist who is Irish and now lives in England. But we were doing our MAs together, and we were both sort of getting our manuscripts together to send them out to publishers. And as you do, you give it to friends to read and you get their feedback. And so he came back and he said, well, yeah, I enjoyed your poems, but you tend to use that word oleander a great deal. And being from Bermuda, oleanders are kind of everywhere. And I just thought, well, I wouldn't tell an Irish person not to use the word swan or mushroom or potato. And so there was some offense taken, and this poem came out of it. But we have remained and are dear friends. On being told by an Irishman that I overuse oleander. If I agree, will you then permit me the use of avocado, mango, palmetto, sargasso, wahoo, pompano, longtail, loquat, mangrove, grotto, coral, and cahao, the word we gave the only indigenous creature to be found on our small island? Bougainvillea, pawpaw, cassava, barracuda, bermudiana, a tiny wild iris that is almost an adjective. Frangipani, amaryllis, hibiscus, kiskadee, skink, cereus, but most of all, cedar. Can I keep cedar? Because we have a strain of cedar that, like the cahao, is indigenous to our island and to which we have given the island's name. And this cedar, the most fragrant, the most buoyant of cedars, rich-grained and producing oils, is in danger. It was once the bronze bones of whalers and dinghies and prize-seeking sloops that outstripped what the world had to offer. And while it played its part in the fabric of flogging posts, gibbets, stocks, stakes, and pyres, when the blight of 46 destroyed almost all the trees, our island mourned. We still mourn and preserve what remains. Today, for example, it is a sin to burn cedar as firewood. Instead, we admire its antique nature, found in the ceiling beams and box pews of St. Peter's, the oldest Anglican church in the Western Hemisphere, in ceremonial chairs and boardroom tables, the banisters of grand staircases, dressers, sideboards, linen chests, captain's chests, window, picture, and bed frames, and a few surviving household items, candle holders, fruit bowls, butter paddles, drinking cups, lace bobbins, even doll's heads, knitting needles, crochet hooks, and toothpicks. And if you say it is cheapened by knick-knack paperweights, letter openers, bookmarkers, shark oil barometers, coasters, puzzle cups, pens, pendants, and brooches, that the island trades with tourists, I will answer that our craftsmen still value the grain and say from scrap the art of tradition. So, can I keep cedar? You see, wise men are surplus. We've allspice, oleander. Our cribs are cedar. That poem is actually a haibun, which is a long passage of description, which has a haiku at the end of it. And we might come back to that towards the end of the reading, that form. It's a form that was used by James Merrill very effectively. I'm going to read Body Surf, which is a poem that was written. My dearest friends, Ken and Jane Vickers, who might be watching tonight, are in Bermuda, and their 3 children, Erin, Arden, and Rowan, are very, very dear to me as well. And Erin was off to university in Exeter, and I thought I'd better write her a little poem, sort of bon voyage, good luck with life kind of poem. And this poem, Body Surf, came out of that. Body Surf, for Erin. To understand everything about the swell. How, on a given day, the 7th in the cycle provides the greatest chance to ride to shore, if caught where the rip collides with the surge, where the wave pries a mouth wide and prepares to heave its traveled miles. To understand the moment of submission, when to dive in and up the crest in order to avoid a rapid tumble. To be flung skyward at the other side, falling yards into the trough and humbled. To understand that we are aligned to leave behind horizons to the climbing wall, hunched and turned 3/4, believing that the traveling momentum is such we'll be absorbed and pulled along. So someone, watching oceans from a towel, might raise herself a little on one elbow and to her partner whisper, dolphins. My father was born in Cornwall, in a tiny little fishing village called Newlyn, which in many ways bears a great resemblance to Stonington, which has a very important fishing industry here. After the war, he became a teacher, and that took him to Bermuda, and my mother followed him out there. One of my favorite memories of my dad is going for walks with him. He was a busy man during the week, but on weekends we would do things together. And one of our favorite things was to walk on this particular beach. And it references both the beach, but also Cornwall as well. So I'm actually in Cornwall during part of this poem. Postamble. Oh, and it mentions oleander. Apologies, Owen. On Sunday walks beneath pink oleander, I'd let loose a week of stored up chat. You'd select a stick from fallen branches, littering our path to Great Bay Beach. Strip the remnant twigs and snap it to the perfect height for your colonial stride. For the rhythmic flicking out before, then regimental poke into adopted soil. The war-filled man on Newlands Pier had chucked the mackerel for exotic species. From our tropic shore, we watched the barracuda cross the panoramic window of the breaking wave, gazed on coral reefs where parrotfish would ape the sergeant major's nibbling drill, and Prospero's son glimpsed his father weave the dreams he heard in shells, holding them holy. Then, adopting to the island's pace, hand in hand, we combed the tidal margins. Without you now, on Newlands Pebble Beach, I want support and search for sticks. I know your row, but not the house's number. Some cousins on the hill behind. Godmother's gone, her shop, renamed, remains. Jack, the crab and crayfish man, best friend who should have been best man, is also dead. His factory stands beside the stream where as a boy you fished for trout, fell and scarred your knee. The village tour has brought this back to me. And I see the ailing Gulf Stream still provides for palm trees on the green. So, if trawlers' gulls won't call for long tails over deep Atlantic seas, I'll still make them. If Cornwall's trees are unfamiliar, I'll rename them. What might be elms become Bermuda cedars, and maybe oaks feign pleasure to be casuarinas. But we share an artist's light. Though these bathers don't lie down on coral sands, they still burn. And a man who rambles finds a stick to aid him. Would you accept the branch I hold? I hesitate, but poke it in adopted soil. And I'll read the title poem to end the Bermuda section. It's Beachcomber's Report, and it references, as the other one did, it references Prospero, and Prospero, of course, as you know, is the great magician lord of the Tempest. And the Tempest and Bermuda have this weird connection in as much as in 1609 there was a shipwreck on the island, and there was a report of it eventually made its way back to London, and written by a man called William Strachey, and it became a cause célèbre. And there's pretty much no doubt that it inspired Shakespeare, who would have heard of it. And he was associated with people who had funded that venture. He would have heard of this, and it probably inspired the Tempest. Beachcomber's Report. The best place to hear the ocean in a shell is at a plain wooden desk in a bare room, your eyes closed, knowing that if open, they would overlook the sound you are trying to remember. If you're on a beach checking driftwood for texture, density, and weight, stop. Take the pieces to the fireside and, just before burning, smell them. Then rub your index finger along the grain. That's when you will value their assets best. When you pick up an imperfect green glass lobster pot float, carry it to a distant beach where such things do not exist, and drop it implausibly beyond the high tide mark for locals to puzzle over. Barbie heads, Ken torsos, Cabbage Patch fingers are best buried in identikit suburban yards, forgotten, save for a vague feeling a writer might one day dig a bed for roses and imagine non-existent children. Should you retrieve the message from the bottle, hide the note in a library frequented by academics within a dry encyclopedia. Biographie générale, 35 à 36, mer à mur. Check from time to time if it has disappeared. Collect frayed orange nylon rope and pay someone who knits the going rate for a sackcloth and ashes jumper, ideal for sitting in that bare room, listening for the ocean in a shell. And when all of this has been accomplished, burn the desk, scatter the driftwood cinders, throw all floats and dull parts back to the sea, unravel the jumper, and travel to Bermuda, primed to search for Prospero's book. If you recall, at the end of The Tempest, Prospero throws his book of magic into the sea. So yes, I will move to America, sort of, in as much as this is about Merrill, but it's really Merrill in Greece. So, and it's in, I think, 9 parts, and it's third person, first person, third person, first person, as it goes on. And please, Merrill scholars, this is not a biography. It's more of a riff on his time in Greece and a more imaginative interpretation, perhaps. So please don't be looking for facts in this. Merrill abroad. Old New England spills from his silver spoon tongue. The expansive A in palm, the missing R and star, underscoring a sweep of hands across the heavens, boundaries questioned, the inherited ease of sinking into the arms of a rustic chair, and Congress with men on marble steps, all Greece and new language before him. I paid what was owed the old kingdom and crossed 9 waves into exile. They were quick, those men in penny loafers, to keep account of any depreciation. Here, scars blend with my sun-tanned skin that afternoon showers will cleanse. Then I'll receive inquisitive Persian kings, astronomers, oracles, mathematicians on the grounds of my new estate. Not for the faint-hearted, these parlor games, Mademoiselles and dinner party guests flee after the first dissection, and he is left to watch blood grow cold on the scalpel. Not quite alone. Always the Trojan followers who live to squabble outside the chamber doors. He smears his bloodied thumb on ringlets, across the torso, down well-delineated thighs, toes, careful to avoid Achilles' heel. The boy diving for pearls repeatedly has the sepia postcard allure favored by Edwardian archaeologists. But on this fair head there is no price other than what we all pay when faces that ought to be sculpted make us dread the mirror. He brings another oyster to the surface. I join the ranks of tomb raiders and photograph the booty. Mahjong pieces, the night's winnings, a jigsaw muddled on its bays, the Turkish throw far from just so, a hubbly-bubbly abused. As the swollen household dreams, men in pantaloons go down to the sea for the launch of their working day, while the perfect host, flagging by dawn, searches casualties for a pad and pen to record the first sail billowing. E. As you suggested, I've demanded time alone. The tidal pool is now my only clock, days divided by detachment from the ocean. And I've made my study waves until I find a sympathy, which might lie in the moment held before they break, a comma for effect before the storyteller's revelation. Lovers found in bed, the reading of the killer clause in old Aunt Molly's will. And then such thunder. One is washing in, and I'm running out of room. Much love, J. From the villa on Mount Lycabettus, on the second Tuesday in every month at 3 a.m., he watches the ghost of Patroclus steal between the Parthenon's columns. It's been going on for years, this assignation, and still they're no nearer than acquaintances. Tonight, he offers tomatoes from his vine, the first press of olive oil, good wine, barely enough to equal his love. I bleed illness to my bones, always a weakening frame. Under the sheerest cotton, an alabaster lover sleeps. I am Odysseus returned to the foot of Penelope's bed, a lesson in what's old and yearns, reliant on the days before disfigurement ushered doubt into play. Let the rush of wind through trees act as chorus. The grand funereal queen climb his pyre, and his death song be magnificent. Let the wind lift ashes beyond illumination, lost in a blind heaven, and carry them to rain on fading ships that bear the unfaithful away, a guilty blessing for those who believe themselves beyond infection by lovers. I lived in America briefly for a little while first of all, in Colorado. I tried to be a dancer. I was an apprentice with the Colorado Ballet, and then I moved to San Francisco. And I threw myself into being gay and lived and worked on the Castro Street, which of course is sort of the gay mecca of the gay world. And this poem is called Queer Lit, and it is about my time there, which was good and too good in many ways. And I also arrived at the height of the awareness about AIDS. And had I arrived there slightly earlier, I think things might have been different. Queer Lit. In '85, I worked with Wolfgang, the patio cafe's head honcho, who died when his convertible nosedived near Sausalito. The beautiful boy beside him, Chris, made it out alive. The boy, Carl, was famous for the snake he wore as a boa and his alarming contact lenses, checkerboards, and tiger stripes. Carlo? I know he mixed a great margarita, and one day he vanished. And Stephen died, hooked on speed supplied by his lover, elegant Stephen, who launched himself off a balcony to simply end a disagreement. And Michael died, another from the patio stable, a passive muscle man who paid for the heydays of sex in the alleyways and beer gardens of Folsom Street clubs. And Tim, a waiter who would become a lawyer, who laughed with me and was tender with me. I learned from Facebook, died from AIDS complications. Many I met at the Midnight Sun and the Stud will be dead. Casuals, who after enough to drink and snort would conduct a brief tour so I wouldn't disturb the house when I left. But I also met you at the Stud. An encounter recalled with particulars exact. Me, perched on the upright barrel to the left of the bar, my hair blonde and long. You in white jeans, that peach-colored vest scant enough to show off your pecs, black hair gelled in iron straight up. But it was your skin's sweat and olive gleam that led me to stare. You caught me, came over, spread and planted yourself between my knees. It was aggressive, and I enjoyed the surprise. No chat, just nods and a set of car keys. How it developed stays between us. But I'll betray your name, Andreas, hoping someone will know where you are. But if he is dead, don't get in touch. Leave me 30 years ago at a bay window on 18th, watching Andreas ignore the placards and prophets insisting our end is nigh, being absorbed by the rot and luster of a Castro night, and living. And a new poem which I have written since I've been here. I'm a big fan of the film director Todd Haynes, and I've written two other poems very loosely based on films of his. And this one is very loosely inspired by his biography of Dylan, which if you've seen it, you'll know it's a quite wacky take on biopics. And it's called I'm Not There, and this is called He's Not There. Here is a boy in a boxcar dreaming he's Guthrie, strumming his guitar across America's flatlands. The backdrop for hymns to the dispossessed and 40 days of something less than twilight's gleaming. We'll not know of the boy until he arrives in glory, bringing befittingly sexy baggage, seductively louche in the Rambo way. He'll hide in your teenagers' bedrooms, seduce your mothers, and then a war. And from the flames, the carcass of this dove will be taken up, and the prophet's mantra in his own land will unite a generation of the discontented. They will have no name. Sign them X, and add his lyrics to catechisms chanted by the masses. So I'm going to move on to Ireland, and if you think some of those poems were long, buckle up. This is from The Tipping Line, which is a series of 8 long poems, all of which are addressed to Rowan Vickers, who, as I might have mentioned, is the son of my dear friends Ken and Jane. Now, Rowan, at the time that this started, we started writing it, he was going to go off to Juilliard to study drama, which he did, and it ends with him getting his first big Broadway break. And it references Bermuda, Ireland, London, New York, Leeds, where I taught for a while. And this section is in Donegal, when Rowan's turning 18. And it references Rowan's grandfather, the great Canadian tenor John Vickers, one of the great voices of the last century. And so there's lots of opera references in it. It also references a Frankenstein, largely James Whale's film of it, the 1931 film, and Creature, the monster, and Creature and the monster and John Vickers and Whale and other things are all they flow through the entire collection. And really, the whole collection is about serendipity and artistic luck in terms of things that pop up and inspire you. And I think that's all you need to know about this particular section. It does reference, Gods and Monsters, which is the film based on James Whale's life, directed by Bill Condon, one of my favorite films. I think Bill Condon's one of the great underrated directors. Anyway, Unit 1. Dear Rowan, the day before your free-for-all 18th, I'm as close as Donegal allows, staying on a gardener's generosity in her caravan yards from Tremor Strand. It's a boy's own landscape where you'll find villagers lighting beacons all along the tidal flats to aid the glider bringing home the Cold War spy, or where you might imagine gasping U-boats surfacing, and in the aftermath where the silence off the mountains begins undoing war. Flights of fancy? Well, in 3 weeks' time, I'll be reading in the Belfast Telegraph of a bomber unearthed on up the coast. The pilot parachuted and lived to 87. So if I tell you here, the beach is the breadth of Bermuda, and there are ancient marram dunes and megalithic chamber tombs, and orchids grow wild, and cotton bursts in bogs, and larks and pipits are the music, and moths have spotted wings, and flocks of resting gulls erupt, unaccustomed to intrusions, and against sleeve tui, a gannet's singularity is magnified to the point that I'm fixated half the day, then believe me, and we'll be all the richer. Right. The gales that blew all week have died, and the sun is out. It both illuminates and shadows the mountains' stone-walled fields and hollows. Cottages and sheep are dotted. I've nestled my back against a lichened rock to watch the Atlantic blue as atoll waters funnel down the inlet, bread and butter stuff, manna for holidaying writers. Instead, for you, I'll create an amphitheater. So grab a rock and have these cliffs and flats serve as your boards and backdrop. Imagine here, where it suits the mind to focus and serve a purpose, it's getting on and the setting sun provides an amber light that makes every blade and stone, the sea, each cloud, the gannet, golden. The beacons on the tidal flat are lit. Villagers, sailors, and our spy assemble. And as the scale of this is operatic, from the farthest field, a Heldon tenor, the rarest of his breed, makes his entrance. He's long incarcerated Florestan, leading fellow prisoners from the dungeon in a whispered chorus praising light. And from his flagship's prow, Otello listens to his Esultate ricochet between the mountains. And Aeneas, whose ancestral ghosts have steered him to his ship, screams Italia from that clifftop. And Tristan's drowning in harmonic waves, and Grimes puts out to sea, this time without a boy, and Sigmund's searching for the wizened tree where magic swords and myths abound, and Samson stumbles as he tries to find both vengeance and redemption. And honest Parsifal stands alone and wiser, the quest completed, the chalice in his hand. A sea of shredded programs fluttering from the gods, torn by an audience struck dumb by singing. Believe me when I tell you all of this is happening and once happened. Or is it startled gulls again, just bluff? As I said, it's late, the sea's now in and another world's arriving on the tide. Time to head for the caravan. The route I'll take will be the tipping line, the point where what floats in finds rest. Today, the usual made strange, pume, jellyfish, feathers, and plastics. soft drink and mouthwash bottles, bait buckets, a fisherman's red glove, a baby's blue spoon, a Green Valley wrapper, a butterlicious tub. And there's one glass item, a Bacardi bottle without its label, only the fruit bat logo on the twist top, and no coded message from headquarters, just condensation that glows of an evening on an Irish beach. And I almost admitted the gull's carcass, a great black-backed, the largest of them all, although it's hard to swear given its state, all flesh gone, splayed wings half buried, and sockets that would look for all the world. Only the jolt yellow beak survives intact, designed to rip the flesh from living prey, like a raptor on the wing, but equally adept with carrion. I take many photos, gull and gulls. Is it the black-back that after supper inspires the selection of Gods and Monsters, which chronicles the final days of James Whale, the discarded Hollywood director who created Frankenstein's creature as played by Boris Karloff? The narrative spools towards Whale's suicide, and with Brendan Fraser, who plays Whale's gardener and cautious physique model, we discover Whale was a veteran of the trenches, and there he lost a lover, and that this war and lover haunt him. Unlike Shelley's, Whale's grotesque is given no soliloquies. Rather, his creatures struck dumb, if not altogether silent. He can grunt his ecstasy on hearing magic from a blind man's violin, laugh with a young girl who throws her flowers upon the water, and he can scream at villagers, fire and lightning. And as language is limited, so too is movement. Creature rarely bends his limbs. Straight-armed, he claws at sky, and leaden feet are lifted from the hip. Then there's the mask that Whale gives to Karloff. The first rough sketch of it, the stitched cranium, the heavy brows, eyes dead in their sockets, and the bolted neck, Whale bequeaths to Fraser for services never rendered. I've watched this movie many times for many reasons, but always for its ending. Dissolve from Whale dead in the pool to years later. Then Fraser's on the sofa with his son, and they're watching Frankenstein on the box. The credits roll, and he shows his son the sketch, but the kid won't believe his father knew the man who drew it. Fraser doesn't force it, and takes out the trash when reminded by his wife. It is a happy family unit. Creature is repressed. But out in the alley, behind the modest home, the night sky is the cobalt blue that only Hollywood night skies can be. And Fraser bins the trash, and it begins to rain, the milky backlit rain that only Hollywood rain can be. And there is thunder. And Fraser closes his eyes and lifts his face to the rain, and he enacts iconic gestures. Creature and creatures, he growls his fear and raises an arm to the sky to claw at lightning. The scale of this is operatic. And believe me when I tell you, behind him, those are not suburban lights in suburban hills. They are torches. Creature has left the trenches, and he is turning, legs unbending, and he lumbers down the rain-slicked alley, clawing, stomping, and trash cans tumble, and he is welcomed by the night, and we are all the richer. I'm alone on my night walk along Tremor. There's no director, tenor, creature, gulls. And they're everywhere. It's sublime. There's a moon, and I see the Bacardi bottle has shifted. Another tide and tipping line. If you'll forgive my stagecraft, out at sea, a ship is signaling, and across the bay, a lamp responds. A submarine will surface, and villagers will light their beacons. There. A plane's exploded, and the parachutist drifts, continuing into his afterlife. Yes, I'm tempted. I want rain and thunder. to become my own conductor. I close my eyes, music swells, and I'm raising an arm to the sky. Now, I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to read one more, which really does have to do with Ireland, and very much based on the River Mill where I have a writer's retreat. And this was the last poem I sent to the great and late Kieran Carson, who very sadly died a few years ago, who was a mentor and inspiration to so many. And this is a poem called Monuments, and perhaps there's a little bit of Kieran somehow in this poem. Monuments. He is beside the stream, this water-drawn man. The slow swirl of an oxbow bend, leading him to pause in the frame of his field and abandon the bank he's shoring up with stone. To notice snow melt forcing itself the length of the clogged mill race. Water pooling in the ploughed clay ground, the low grey clouds. He decides then to plant an orchard in the lee of the resurrected mill and to pour foundations for an orangery with a view of the stream for company. And there must be statuary, something with the musculature of a god, something to stand in the slow waters of the Oxbow Bend, something more in stone. He wades into the stream and arms outstretched mimics the canopy of branches creaking with the weight of ivy. He tilts his head to the sky and welcomes the rain. Water sensuous, stone proud. He holds the pose. And I'm going to close with two things, one of which is James Merrill's amazing and very late poem, A Christmas Tree. It's the season, almost. It's also a poem that I adore, and I've used it in teaching very often. It's just wonderful. And for those of you who don't know, it was written pretty much in the process of James Merrill dying. Christmas Tree. To be brought down at last from the cold, sighing mountain where I and the others had been fed, looked after, kept still, meant, I knew, of course I knew, that it would be only a matter of weeks, that there was nothing more to do. Warmly, they took me in, made much of me. The point from the start was to keep my spirits up. I could assent to that. For honestly, it did help to be wound in jewels, to send their colors flashing forth from vents in the deep, fragrant sables that cloaked me head to foot. Over me, they wove a spell of shining, purple and silver chains, eaves-dripping tinsel, amulets, milagros, software of silver, a heart, a little girl, a Model T, two staring eyes. The angels, trumpets, Bud and Bee, the children's names, in clown-like capitals. Somewhere, a music box whose tiny song played and replayed, I ended before long by loving. And in the shadow behind me, a primitive IV to keep the show going. Yes. What lay ahead was clear. The stripping, the cold streets, my chemicals plowed back into the earth for lives to come. No doubt a blessing, a harvest, but one that doesn't bear now or ever dwelling upon. To have grown so thin, needles and bone. The little boy's hands meeting about my spine, the mother's voice holding up wonderfully. No dread, no bitterness. The end beginning. Today's dusk room aglow for the last time with candlelight, faces love-lit, gifts underfoot, still to be so poised, so receptive, still to recall, to praise. What a poem. And I'll end with a little piece I've been working on, which is going to be a high bun in the style that James Merrill wrote. And it's the very end of it, and it's based in Stonington. And just thank you, everyone, for my time here. This evening, out on the harbor, the one yacht still moored there is pointing north, so we know the tide is coming in. The vaulted heavens are increasingly indigo, but the horizon proves the sun is incendiary. It is ablaze with every imaginable hue of red through orange spectrums. People have come out of their houses and down to the piers to take photographs. Dog walkers have stopped to look. Those in cars are detouring to the point to park and bear witness, to share in a communal wonder. Such spectacle, such stillness and quiet out there. Still poised. Our world bears us. And if our end's beginning in this love-lit harbor, this earth still grants us a shimmering going down, a gilded rising. Thank you.
That is extremely moving. I want a moment of silence here. But one of the great virtues of this virtual reading is that people can watch from all around the world and have been. Paul, that was absolutely beautiful. The final poem was it's such a gift to the community, really, that you're here and you notice and you make this beautiful thing out of the things you notice. Just very quickly, some of the comments coming in from viewers: so moving and beautiful, so powerful, such a magnificent reading, beautiful. We all join together to thank you for a really glorious reading.
Really has been my great pleasure. Really is.
For sharing your work. There's so much I want to talk about. We don't have a lot of time. That first of all, let me say, you must be an expert body surfer, right?
I was pretty good when I was younger.
Yeah,
it wasn't bad.
If you want to try it, we can go get wetsuits and go over to East Beach.
It's a little chilly.
And the other thing I was struck by, I'm actually so interested in what writers do with things, with nouns, or with, it can be any form of speech, but to put things in lists is so hard, and you do it so well.
Yeah,
and you referred to the serendipity of the tipping line. The more to say about that, but I started to think about you as a boy on those Bermuda beaches, discovering things, but finding things, just things that wash up onto the beach. And I wondered, it was starting to seem to me that informs your work deeply. So I'll ask you, as all these things, these objects, these references, these names, these things you gather together, so we can hear them and see them on the page. How do you find them? Where are they coming from?
Ireland has a great lineage of lists. The first poem that supposedly was written about or in Ireland, the Song of Amergin, is this great list of animals and plants and things that Amergin wants to identify himself with as being Irish. And so I am the salmon, I am the deer, etc. Kieran Carson, who I mentioned, was a huge exponent of lists as well. And he very much, and I think I've taken him as a great example and inspiration. He won't just make a list. He'll try and find the sound connections between words and put them in that kind of list. And I'm very much in favor of that. And I mean, as you said in the introduction, I don't really see the point of doing a list unless there's some consonants or alliteration or something going through it that makes it poetry as such. I also think to be less grand, I think lists are also a very good way of cheating. You can get a lot of information into a poem or into anything by using lists, but they serve to illustrate personality sometimes as well. So there's a list about my father in the tipping line when he dies, and I'm going through his things, and it's just a list of the stuff that I find, and very much those objects in some ways defined my dad. So I think there are multiple uses, and I do like them very, very much indeed. In fact, going through stuff to read tonight, I was struck. It's weird. You sometimes don't realize as a writer precisely how often you do things. And I was conscious of the lists very much so in Tipping Line, but I perhaps wasn't as conscious of them elsewhere.
You speak of in the introduction to Queering the Green. There's a lot packed into that introduction, and I think it reflects both on the incredible work you gather there, but on your own work too. And you write about the swerve, which you define as deviation, and then you say that there's a queering of the poems. The poems themselves on their own aren't queer. That we are queer, but the queering becomes a verb in your handling of it. And so I wondered if you could talk about that as applied to your own work. The swerve, the deviation. I love that word swerve actually to think about the movement of aesthetics.
Well, queer theory has become a hugely influential part of academic thinking these days. And it started out being applied to by Judith Butler and others to very specifically queer aspects of queer culture. But it seems to have been expanded beyond that a great deal now. And anything that sort of swerves from, shall we say, acceptive, heteronormative, white male kind of poetry tends to be now queer. And I can understand that, but I think queer culture needs to, in some ways, retain the elements of queer theory that pertain to queer production. I'm not one who argues that queer poetry has to be about being queer, although I think that is an incredibly important part of it. And I read a poem tonight, Queer Lit, is very much about queer narrative. But not everything that a queer person writes has to be about being queer. And the vast majority of my work isn't overtly at least about that. And I think there's a danger in worshiping too much, as I say in the introduction. There's a danger of elevating content over the actual art of poetry itself. So if a poem is about something, it's considered to be good because it's about that subject. And I think that's a very dangerous route to be going down. So I think for me now, the idea of queering a poem, it is a little bit about the queer person behind it, if that is the case, but it's about making poetry in some way other. So it's other than a normal use of language, that there is some aspect of the poem that does something different from, and I think all good poetry aims for that, and I think it's an ongoing process from generation to generation to think how that is actually going to take place. So you have great shifts in poetry along the way. The Romantics did something very radical when they were, Wordsworth and Coleridge, when they first came along, they were incredibly radical. Yeats, in some ways also, but Eliot and Pound in particular, very much out of favor as human beings, and rightly, but they changed poetry utterly. And in Ireland, this process has been a little slower. I think the standard Irish lyric has sort of, modernism sort of escaped or overlooked Ireland in some ways. But now I think there are poets who are really taking the bull by the horns and thinking about, how are we going to do something different now with the Irish lyric?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very exciting writers who are doing exactly that now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a comment you make in that introduction that is very expressive. You write, what the poem is about is everything. Stop. Period. No, you write, just no. So,
Yeah, and I feel very strongly about that.
I know. Well, I can tell. Just no. So in the minute we have left, can you tell us about the just no of
Yeah.
the what's not everything?
Well, I think poetry does have an important place to play in identity politics and expressing problems and ills, and as a form of therapy. And that's all well and good. And I value it for that, or I can value it for that. But if I'm going to value it as poetry as well, and we are, after all, supposedly engaged in that art form, then we also have to consider how it works as a poem. And if we lose sight of that, then we cheapen ourselves and we cheapen poetry.
Mm-hmm.
How's that for a final line?
That is good. That was perfect. Well, thank you.
It's been a great pleasure.
Absolutely wonderful, visually entrancing too, and the setting. So
well, thank you very much.
Really, really special. So thank you all for listening. Yes. And then yes. It will be in our virtual library, so people can who weren't able to watch it tonight or want to watch it again can see it. So,
lovely.
Great. Good to see you. Bye.
Thank you.
So hi. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bergen. It is lovely to see the James Merrill hidden study of 107 behind you. It's very nostalgic.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks so much. So this is my new book. It's called The Math Campers.
My own novel. It's called These Women.
It looks like this.
Well, the first thing I'll say is all the dreams are actual dreams. There's nothing worse than a fabricated dream. You can always tell.
I normally don't write in first person because of the fact that as soon as you have a narrator, you tend to have somebody listening, or there's an implied audience.
I just got to soak up in the atmosphere in that house. You just feel like a writer, and you feel like you're part of this tradition in a community, and it feels like the work is important.
Magical things happen when you're looking at Merrill's books.
Well, it was a really, really transformative residency for me. It might sound like a bit of an overstatement, but it really wasn't.
Merrill's really distinct imagination was present in every detail.
Thanks, Bye. Enjoy Stonington on my behalf.